Laura, that was so great. Your voice just gets better and richer all the time. Wasn't that wonderful? It was great. Thank you. Good morning. Awakening the quality of life. You know, we probably all take time every once in a while to discern what makes life good, just okay, or fantastic. And sometimes it depends on our family history. What was the history of the quality of life of our family? And what was the quality of life that we had growing up? And what was the quality of life of our grandparents and our parents when they were growing up, and our grandparents? Chances are they were all different. Different times, different ways of being. Traditionally, I think parents want their children to have a better quality of life than they did. And so that's why we strive as parents to give our children a really great experience in learning how to grow up. But Carl Jung said this: nothing has a stronger influence psychologically on their environment, and especially on their children, than the unlived life of the parents. Unlived life of the parents. Didn't have this when I was young, but you're going to have it. The unlived life, it's something to think about. Are we striving for the unlived life of our parents? Or, you know, where are we in all this? Personally, as a child, I thought my life was normal, totally normal. We lived in an addition of houses, of hundreds of houses, called the Lane Addition, and they were all 800 square feet, 3-bedroom houses, if you can imagine that. There wasn't much room in any of them, but the whole addition was like that, just hundreds of them. So there were a lot of young families and lots of kids around. It was what I think of as middle-class America after World War II. You know, the people could own a house. In fact, I think our house cost $5,000 back then in the 50s. But then my father died when I was 10, and my mother went to work immediately at the Air Force Base locally, and she worked hard to be sure we would not have to give up that house. And her intention was having us have a normal life in the neighborhood and never feeling like we were poor. But it was many years before I recognized how hard that was for her. And I never realized that we had less, because you don't miss what you don't know about. While my friends would say, oh, we're going on vacation, I had no idea what that was. We're going hiking. I don't know, what's that? We're going on a picnic, things that we never did, but like I said, I never missed them because I didn't know about them. In fact, the time I went to a really nice restaurant was the evening of my senior prom. That's the first time I ever went to a nice restaurant. My mother was frantic. Did I teach her how to be in a nice restaurant? And luckily my boyfriend, who went with me to the prom, his mom was very adamant. This is how you are when you're in a restaurant. So I did learn a lot. But then in my teenage years, I found this book, The Power of Positive Thinking by Norman Vincent Peale. And I must have read that book 5 times right in a row, because it opened up a world of possibilities to me that I had never even thought about. And he talked about the power of our intention, and I started experimenting with that. And it was wonderful. A whole new world was open to me. My mom said in high school, you've got to take secretarial courses so you'll always have a job. And so when I graduated from high school, I was doing this intention thing. I'm a secretary, and 2 days after graduation, I had a secretarial job. Now how about that? That was really powerful, because it paid 90 cents an hour, if you remember those days. So then at 19, I got married, and we went to Whidbey Island up off the coast of Seattle. My husband was in the Navy. Okay, there's a secretarial job up here for me. So I went to the Navy Exchange, the department store, and I got a job $1 an hour. I'm moving up the ladder, man. I'm moving up the ladder. And so when we were done and moved back to Ohio, for what reason I don't know, because the West Coast is so beautiful. But anyway, I got another job. I made $1.10 an hour. I'm like, yay, God, this is really good. Norman Vincent Peale, Power of Positive Thinking. It was just wonderful. So looking back, every time I achieved my goals, my quality of life was reset at a different level. You don't go backwards, you go forwards, you go for more. And I was the first person in my whole extended family to go to college. That reset my quality of life, big time. I went to work for corporate America. My friends said, why in the world would you do that? But now I wasn't making hourly wages, I was making big bucks, $16,000 a year. So that reset my whole life. So then when I came here and met my soulmate, Paul, that reset my whole life, big time. And then I found religious science, and my life changed forever. It changed forever. It's been a fascinating journey, starting with my mother as my role model. I Googled quality of life for this talk, and I found that there are 3 prominent levels of intelligence that contribute to our quality of life: rational intelligence, emotional intelligence, and spiritual intelligence. You may not know, but in the early 1900s, it was accepted that a person who had rational intelligence would succeed in life. Now, rational intelligence was someone who was a deep thinker. Now, my experience, I've met deep thinkers, but they didn't have common sense. But sometimes those two don't go together. But by the 1990s, it had shifted, and the accepted theory was that a person with high emotional intelligence would succeed. Why? Because they had their emotions under control. They would have a better capacity to manage anything because they wouldn't get emotional about it. I found that kind of interesting because in 1993, this book Martha Nussbaum wrote, Quality of Life, was published, and she listed the indicators of a good quality of life: wealth, employment, the physical environment, our body, our mental health, our education, recreation, leisure time. All those were indicators of a good quality of life. But now we're in the 21st century, and the debate on quality of life has changed. And I found this wonderful article. There are copies at the board desk if you're interested. It's called Impact of Spiritual Intelligence on the Quality of Life. This research professor, Professor Singh, did a lot of studies on that, and he found that spiritual intelligence, which he called SQ, or spiritual quotient, is the ultimate intelligence necessary for functioning effectively in the world. SQ allows people to be creative, to change the rules, to alter situations, and to discriminate between what they want to do. Not always available to people who are rational or emotionally intelligent. He found that having a high SQ allows us to differentiate between what's right and not so right. He didn't say wrong, he said right and not so right. And guess what that was? Listening to our inner voice. Listening to our inner voice. He found that most people have undeveloped that area of spiritual intelligence, and they miss out on a much richer life. So he and his team decided to do a research study on 303 government executives to see the impact of spiritual intelligence on their quality of life. Now, don't laugh too hard, but I think I might have your attention, because what if all the people running the government had great spiritual intelligence? It'd be a different world, wouldn't it? It'd be a different world. The interesting thing is, spiritual intelligence is learned. You can learn it. That's why we have so many classes here. You can learn it. So again, rational intelligence is about thinking logically, problem solving, and whether you have rational intelligence, it can be tested to see how advanced or how high quality it is. Emotional intelligence is about feelings, the capacity to recognize our own feelings and the emotional feelings of other people. Great thing to have, definitely. It can also be tested, and it can also be trained. I think we learn a lot about that here, emotional intelligence. But if all our attention is focused on the outer world of other people's emotions and our emotions, there's not much left to explore the inner world. And so with spiritual intelligence, there's a couple definitions I want to share first. Webster defines spirit as the animating principle that gives us life. That's spirit. Spirituality is defined as our need to be connected with something larger than we are, something like we consider divine. And as a teenager, I began to question, much to my mother's chagrin, question the beliefs of Catholicism, because I went to a Catholic school all the 12 years and wore uniforms, so I have no fashion intelligence. I have no fashion intelligence. So anyway, I blame it on that anyway. And so I started buying other sacred texts and other books of other religions, and I wanted to find out what everybody else said about this thing called God. And that's when I started my spiritual journey, although I didn't realize it. But the power of positive thinking kick-started that for me. And it carried me through until I finally got here in Redding and found this church. Spiritual intelligence is about being present in the world. And my greatest teacher was Dr. James Golden, who some of you know and some of you may not, but he was here for 27 years, a magnificent man. And I really didn't like him bringing Eastern beliefs into Science of Mind, which is so practical. But there was this one time when we did a 3-hour meditation. Last time I ever did that, but we did it. And after about 2 hours and 50 minutes, I started having this plume of purple smoke coming out of my head. I could just feel it and smell it and see it. It was just an amazing thing. And so I had this feeling of totally being connected with the universe. But the most important thing about Dr. James was his ability to behave with wisdom and compassion while maintaining inner and outer peace regardless of what was happening. For you who knew Dr. James, would you agree? Absolutely. I didn't know it then, but that's the definition of spiritual intelligence, the ability to behave with wisdom and compassion while maintaining inner and outer peace regardless of the situation. It's called the most fundamental of all intelligences because it guides us from within. Spiritual intelligence is a big part of practitioner and minister training because we have to have the ability to behave with wisdom and compassion. We have to maintain inner peace no matter what story people bring us, no matter what's happening in their life. But back to the study about the government executives, that I was just so fascinated with that because they found that a government executive who has high spiritual intelligence responds appropriately to situations. And they analyze, why am I in this situation? And they analyze, what can I do to contribute good to this situation? What a great leader. What a great thing. What a great talent to have. But it goes beyond that. High spiritual quotient is we're comfortable operating in areas where there are boundaries. We question them. We have a moral sense about us. We look at rigid rules and go, oh, wait a minute. What if it was different? What if it was easy? We have more compassion and understanding. I was pondering yesterday, have I ever met a government executive who had a high spiritual quotient? And I had to think about that because in my business in the timber industry and pulp and paper, I met a lot of government executives. I met a lot of, congressmen, senators. It was just part of my job. I was the outreach for the industry. And I remembered when the timber industry asked me and Nadine Bailey, you may read some of her articles in the paper sometimes, she's from Hayfork, great timber woman. And we were chosen by the Northern California timber industry to meet with then Vice President Dan Quayle. He came out here because the spotted owl controversy was blowing up. It was going to ruin the industry. It was going to devastate so many mills and so many thousands of lives. So he came out, and the men in the industry picked me and Nadine to sit down and talk with him. It was really interesting. We really had our act together very well. We prepared our case, we presented it, and he said, would you come back to Washington, D.C. and meet with my staff and tell them this story? Of course we did. Of course we did. And when we did, they listened intently. They were very kind. They took copious notes. They asked lots of questions. Nothing ever changed, but we felt heard, we felt listened to, and we felt respected. To me, that's a good example of a high spiritual quotient in a government executive. So studies show that the rational and the emotional intelligences are located in different areas of our brain. If you've read of any of Dr. Joe Dispenza's work, they're in different parts of the brain, while spiritual intelligence is a whole brain effect, and it requires conscious intention to activate it. Conscious intention. It's the same energy that is found in the groups of 8 process, the powering up in the groups of 8. The healing effect begins in a group when it has the conscious intention within the whole group to do a healing for a person in the group. Let's say they want greater inner peace. But there's also a mirror effect in that process. The person doing the holding of the spiritual knowledge, of the intention, with the emotion, also finds greater inner peace. So it's a fascinating thing. Dr. Joe's book, Becoming Supernatural, How Common People Are Doing the Uncommon, says that all possibilities exist in the quantum field. And we can turn these possibilities into reality because our world is just a 3-dimensional energy field. And to do this, it requires 2 things: clear intention and elevated emotion. You have to get clear on what you want. You have to be very specific. Our intention is an electrical charge in our brain. We send it out into the unified field. Adding emotion to it, I have it, I feel it, I know it, I got it, is a magnetic charge in our brain. Those feelings are like love, gratitude, real intense love, joy, excitement, wonder. So you add those 2 together and you've got real powerful things going on. Actually it's the 3rd step of spiritual mind treatment. State what you have, feel it, trust in it, release it, let it go. Well, I've used spiritual mind treatment many times since I found this teaching, and I wanted to share one of the most incredible times that it came to fruition. I was working at Wheelabrator, the power plant in Anderson that uses wood waste for fuel, and I was there from the startup of that plant. And they went from opening up one day, requiring 100 semi-truckloads of fuel every day, 7 days a week. And it was up to me to find it. So I had done my homework, and anyway, it was working out really well. I'm a really good negotiator. And at one point in those first 10 years, the sawmill industry weakened because there were fewer housing starts, not as much timber, and not as much lumber needed to be processed, so there was less wood waste. And there were 7 wood-fired power plants in Northern California, and all of us were scared, we were afraid. I'm doing treatment like crazy, there's always enough, there's always an answer. Finally, I got the fuel managers from those 7 plants together, and I said, come on, there's gotta be a way. I said, heck, I worked in Puget Sound. I bought wood waste from Canada, from British Columbia. Let's get it. Let's buy some up there and barge it down to San Francisco. And they went, we can do that? Of course we can do that. So that's what we did. I called up my connections up in British Columbia and looking for fuel, and Fletcher Channeling said, hey, we got extra fuel, and I called C-SPAN. I said, have you got an ocean-going barge? Yep, we can go load it up in Vancouver, and took 4 days to bring it down the coast into the Port of Richmond near Berkeley. And then, not even paying attention to my notes here. The longshoreman, we had the longshoreman, had to unload it. And on that barge was 480 semi-truckloads of wood. It was bigger than this building. I have a picture of all of us standing in front of that barge, and I go, oh my God, we did it. We really did it. It was expensive, but it kept all 7 plants running. It was just an incredible thing to have happen. So treatment works. So back to the government executives. What this study found is that as they got older, they got into more spiritual practices. And so it enhanced even further their spiritual intelligence, their SQ. Because, when you're younger, an executive, you're building your career, you have a family, you have all these things to distract you. And then somewhere around maybe 35, 40, there's this little tug that says, there's something more here to support you. This little voice that comes to us that often brings us here in that age group. So it makes sense that they found that the older the executive became, the more they brought into their life spiritual intelligence. So there's a lot of practices that you can do to improve your spiritual intelligence, and we do them here: meditation, prayer, spiritual mind treatment. Dr. James did lots of chanting, lots of spiritual classes where you can learn the enormous benefit of bringing spirituality into your daily life. It moves us forward on this upward spiral of learning that our soul is doing, on this upward spiral. It moves us forward on that. I just got done giving a class, It's All God, and Twyla was in the class, and Twyla's been saying that ever since I've known her, but when she finished the book, Walter Starkey's book, she said, this is the best book I've ever read because I didn't realize how deep I needed to go to really believe that. So I wanted to leave you with a quote from this professor, research scholar, Professor Zing. He said this: "Human life is the greatest gift that infinite intelligence bestows on us. We ought to respect it, and we ought to love it and make the most of it. We're spiritual beings going through a human experience, and I feel obliged to develop my SQ, my spiritual intelligence, to live the highest quality of life that I can." And from Reverend Sue and I, this center is here to inspire and empower you to live spiritually fulfilling lives. So you are invited to participate in that vision that we hold every day. You're invited to live the highest quality of life you can, which is based on spiritual intelligence. And so you can join in and participate, and as we'll hear at the end of this service, the peace song says, "Let it begin today." Thank you.
More beautiful music. I'm loving this music today. And don't forget, there's CDs in the back, so after we're all done, you can take them home.